Welcome, everybody, to a special episode of We're Libertarians. I'm your host, Hodey Johns here, and I got two special guests with me here today. Let me introduce them to you briefly. Mike Shipley, how are you doing today, Mike?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on again. I really enjoyed being here last time, and I'm excited again.
Yeah, I've grown a lot since last time. Mike was like my first Daily Show appearance ever. And I have learned a lot since then. And so he has been with me while I was bad. And so he gets to be with me here now that I'm decent. And then we've got Ashley Shade. Ashley, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Better now that I got two folks like you on the show. I really do appreciate you coming on. We are going to be talking about some really sensitive stuff. And a lot of it's just hard to talk about. And I appreciate you two both being brave enough to come on. Let me give you an introduction to the show here, listeners. I wanted to talk about some LGBTQ plus issues that are facing the culture still today. And it helps to have people that actually face those problems. We've had videos before that are just eye-opening, where you see me and you just say, I didn't know that's what I think America is awakening to say, is that what it's like to being a Black person in the United States? Is that what it's like to be a woman in the United States? Is that what it's like to be any number of things in the United States? And we are opening our eyes because we and the United States, man, I've been all over the world and I understand that we are doing well. We need to do better. And we don't do better by just sitting on our hands and hoping that better happens. And there are still many problems and many improvements that we can make. So what you're going to hear today isn't going to be a lot of politics. It's going to be about culture. And as we all know, as our famous and dearly beloved host of this show, Chris Spangle, will tell you, politics is downstream from culture. We have to change culture before we change politics. People won't be treated equally unless we treat them equally first. So what I hope you gather from this podcast is that you hear some of these things and understand that we still have a ways to go. You might not always be able to affect politics. You will always be able to affect your actions, and your actions will affect politics. So if you have any questions, guys, I've got several on the Facebook already, but if you've got any questions, I'll pop them up live for you here. And we'll ask these guys later, but until then, let's get them started with their experiences. I guess there's no point in beating around the bush here. Mike, if you want to start, what are some experiences that you've had as a person who is in the LGBTQ plus community what's the experience that you've had to deal with that you would want someone like me to know?
Thanks. So as a gender and sexual minority person, as I was thinking about when you invited me to do this podcast, and I was thinking through the afternoon, like what couple of stories I would tell, one that popped in my mind that I don't tell much is like the time I was literally gay bashed. And this is the sort of like there was this show called Queer as Folk where, the guy's boyfriend got gay bashed with a bat. And it was like, oh my gosh, that really happens. And it was all dramatized for the public. But like, I'm living proof, and thank God I'm still living, because that happened to me in 1990. I believe it was 1998 or 9. So that was 20 years ago. But there's not much to the story. Like, I was just out walking at night, and two men saw me, and they came running. They actually split up. They came around in two different directions to kind of corner me. And they had baseball bats, and they each hit me twice. And I kind of, screamed and ran. And I remember as I was running, feeling like a sense of shame that I just screamed like a girl. And I ran to my, and I laugh, and like, actually that's, of course, if you really want to do a deep dive on the analysis, that in turn is internalized misogyny, right? Like, how are you supposed to scream when someone's hitting you with a baseball bat? And like, why can't it sound like whatever gender comes out. Like, I think it's okay to like just scream, right? But anyway, I ran to my friend's house because I had a friend that lived nearby, and I knocked on her door, and it was like 2:00 in the morning, and I was crying so hard. And these are really good friends of mine. And she brought me inside, and she was like, "What's wrong?" And like, I couldn't even speak. I was just sobbing. "There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not a bad person." And like, she literally brought me to the couch and like held me like a baby, like literally, like I sobbed into her bosom like a baby with a mother for like 45 minutes, or like, I don't know, it seemed like an extraordinarily long time to me, but she corroborates that it was a really long time. And all I could do is just, "There's nothing wrong with me." And it took it, and like, I couldn't even tell them for a long time. Finally, I was like, "I just got gay bashed." And, they're like, "Oh my God, what happened?" Blah, 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 blah. So anyway, I tell that story because it's a bit of a tearjerker, and it's almost like stereotypical. And to be, I don't know, I'm sure that affected me psychologically, but like, I guess I set that up because it's not even really the most insidious type of psychological harm that gets inflicted. The kind of harm that breaks you down on a day-to-day basis are the sort of the microaggressions that you experience. There's not quite enough to actually react to, because if you constantly did, you would just be combative in every moment. You would be overreacting. When someone makes a sort of snide remark in a group setting, for instance, and what are you going to do? Stop the meeting, so that you can like, and those little things get in your skin too. And so I have one other story that I think I want to tell, maybe as we get into this. Like, maybe you can do Ashley's story, and then we'll come back and do another round of stories, because there's another one with more layers of like social context that I think will really kind of nail home how this harm not only just comes from like homophobic people, or even normal people who carry homophobic ideas without realizing it, but also even how that kind of filters back out and comes back through even gender and sexual minority organizing spaces themselves.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that story. So just as some context for me, because I think I live in a world where I have never seen somebody like a roving gang of people looking for gays to bash them. So were these people that you knew somehow, or how did they just know and happen to have the bad? I mean, what was it?
No, I mean, so this was, for one thing, granted, I was high on cocaine, 2 a.m. Like, I was literally out like trying to get picked up. I mean, and it's almost like when you think about like the Me Too movement, and you hear this coming out of rape culture, like, it's not that person's fault. I actually had to work through the idea that like, that was not my fault. There's nothing wrong with being up at 2 a.m. on a weekend trying to get laid. Everyone does that. Well, not everyone, but at least not all the time. I was going through my youthful carefree years, and what else did you expect me to be out doing? But I was walking around in a known sort of, like, it was definitely a cruisy area. So it would be a place where if you were going to kind of lurk and look for a gay man who was out by himself, you could make an educated guess that neighborhood might be a place where you could find one. So as best as I can tell, that is what was going on.
So it was targeted in that area because that's where they knew those kind of people would be. And so they were looking for violence or somebody to hurt, and they found you. That's awful, and I'm sorry, and thank you for your story there. Something else before I turn it over to Ashley, something that I did want to talk about is it is okay, guys, to have this conversation without a perfect knowledge. Mike and I have conversed before on the internet, and I am a very imperfect knowledge type of person. I love to read, and I love to try and learn more. But even when I was setting up this show, I called, I was like, hey, I'm looking for, hey, we need to talk about our transsexual experience. And it's like, well, it's actually transgender experience, Hodey, but that's okay. You're forgiven. And it's okay. You might not be perfect when you discuss these things. You might not have all the terminologies. You might not understand or know about Mike's experience or Ashley's experience. But we learn, and we learn by talking. We learn by doing, and just say, hey, correction here, just so you know. You mentioned microaggressions, Mike, and it is something that we'll talk about. We'll talk about it later. But you're probably doing some of these things. If you're anything like me, you don't mean to. You're usually sometimes even trying to make them feel included. Oh, I tease all my buddies. I note all these things. I was just trying. I thought I was treating people equally. And what you're doing is making somebody feel more oppressed. And so that's the reason we have these conversations. I bring this up because, once again, I said, hey, you're an LGBTQ plus person, instead of saying gender and sexual minority, which is the more proper terminology, right? Let's add that to the dialogue gun for me. I'm hosting this conversation as a person that doesn't know enough. And so I hope you're listening to this as somebody who doesn't know enough either. We could all stand to learn more about things we don't know about. I would love, I'm big on economics. I would love to tell everybody what I know about business and how businesses are oppressed. But unless you run one, you might not know. You might not know what I've been through. Right now, we're going to give that same type of respect to Mike and Ashley and people like them when they tell their story. To say, hey, you know what? I don't have your glasses. Can I see through them really quick so that I can try to understand? Ashley, thank you so much for your patience. I meant to get all that done in the introduction, but would you tell us a little bit about your story and maybe something that's happened to you that somebody like me would never understand or wouldn't have to deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I am a transgender woman, and I came out about over 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago now. My experience has been different than most people. In many ways, I've been lucky in my coming out because I am a large person and I'm well known in my community. I haven't faced physical violence since coming out. People don't approach me to be mean to me in person. Most of the ignorance or hate type speech I experience is online. I can recall one experience, though. Back in 2017, I ran for public office, ran for city council, and I received a letter, an anonymously typed letter in my mailbox that was essentially a death threat. And that shook me a bit. Someone actually physically put a letter in my mailbox saying, we hope you die and we think you should die. That was crazy. So for me, that was an experience that I don't wish upon anybody. I get messages like that online on a frequent basis. Luckily, I don't take any stock in them. They're usually just idiots, blowing steam. But to wish harm or death upon a person just because they're somebody different, it's not okay. And in the transgender community especially, people are being murdered at a egregious rate, especially trans women of color. And our community doesn't deserve to be killed just for being who we are. Nobody deserves to be murdered. So there's a big, deep conversation that needs to be had in, learning about why somebody might be different and how to be respectful to those that you might not understand.
Yeah, it's so let's talk about something specifically. You say a lot of it happens online. A lot of hate happens online. What type of hate do you see?
Usually it's statements like, transgender people don't deserve to exist. They're mentally ill. They're, handicapped. They deserve to die. Things like that get said often, unfortunately. There are plenty of people who think that people like me belong in a mental institution rather than in society, that there's something wrong with our brains, brains. And the truth is, there's nothing wrong with our brains. It's our body that got messed up. Our brains are fine. If you look at the studies, when they study the brains of transgender individuals, the majority of the time they match up with the gender identity of the person rather than the physical biological sex that they were born as, which shows that the problem is not in the brain. The problem is somewhere along the line in the birthing process, something changed. Some kind of chromosome changed, who knows? But mentally, I've always been female. And for most of my life, I had to live hiding who I was. I was not somebody that was out. I was not somebody that was even close to being someone you would suspect to be out. And so for me, I lived most of my life hiding who I truly was, and I wasn't able to express myself. And it made me a very mean and angry and miserable person. And something that, is important for the transgender community is 40% of trans people attempt suicide. And a large reason for that is because they feel like society won't accept them, that society won't allow them to be a part of the world that we live in. We're constantly ridiculed and mocked and made fun of. Even in culture, if you look at movies, the tranny jokes are all over the place. Throughout different movies, there have been movies made completely based on tranny jokes. And tranny is an offensive word to many transgender people. But those are the kinds of things that we need to change as a culture to say, you know what, it's not okay to just make fun of somebody who's different. It's not okay to wish harm upon people who are different. Let people live, let people be who they are, as long as they're not hurting anybody else. And, you don't have to accept, you don't have to like who I am. I just ask that people respect me as a human being and treat me with dignity and respect and allow me to live the life that I've chosen to live for myself and allow me to be who I am. And I think as people begin to do that, they'll learn that we're just human beings like anybody else.
My goal is to kind of push back on that just a little bit. And this is, I think that it's a good place to start. And I'm glad that you're willing to accept that this is an introduction to say that, hey, you don't have to accept me or love me, but let me be. I don't think that's good enough. I think that it is something that we need to say, we do need to learn to embrace. At one time, I probably was a person who felt like I was good enough for permitting someone else's existence. That is not really a culture that's, for me, I don't feel that that's a culture that's conducive to equality, because I don't permit my families to exist or friends to exist. I don't simply allow them to breathe the same air as me. I welcome them in. I say, let's have fun together. Let's go to parties. Let's be classmates. Let's work together. And so I am glad that you are willing to accept that people will just say, I don't agree with your lifestyle, I don't want anything to do with you, but you're allowed to live your life. But I think for me, I feel there's more that is needed to the culture. And Ashley and Mike, you can both talk about that as far as how much you feel is good enough.
Well, I guess I will agree with what you said. Merely being tolerated is, first of all, what it feels like to get tolerated is extremely patronizing and cold. And when you're in a room full of people that are only tolerating you, it doesn't really feel much different than just being in a room where you're being silently hated anyway. So you can definitely feel the difference between someone who has had a genuine change of heart and a desire to fully integrate into a society where everyone's accepted versus one where there's merely sort of, oh, we love you, we just hate your sin kind of thing. What is that? There's no way to separate me from who I am. It would be that's not how humans are. We're sort of holistic beings, and our sexuality is only one aspect of who we are, but who we are is like one single like thing. You know, there's no way to like separate and compartmentalize that so that you know, to appease you. You know, it kind of, there's this phrase, oh, I don't care what you do as long as you do it behind closed doors. Well, it's more than just sex. Like if I'm at work and you ask me how my weekend was and I'm talking about, you know, I had a great weekend. I did a road trip with my partner. How can I tell you that story without using a pronoun? Right. Or like, you know, or speaking of work, let's say it's the holiday, you know, event and people are bringing their spouses, you know what I mean? What am I supposed to do? Make up an excuse and lie to you, or like show up with my same-sex partner? Like, it isn't just about like keeping this thing that you think is so gross, you don't want to have to look at it like behind a closed door. Like as a human being. And I really like what you said earlier. A lot of times I say like politics is a lagging indicator because political majorities are the ones that change the law. So until you've built a political majority that can make that change, then that change is not going to take place. So I think the way you put it is that society I don't remember what you said, society is ahead of, I don't know, society changes culture first, or I don't know, whatever you said, but it's the same point. Like, yes, we have to drive towards someone who's merely tolerating you is not going to run out and like vote for you to be free to walk down the street holding someone's hand. You know what I mean? Like they're not ready for that. And so I guess my point is I agree.
Okay, cool. And again, I wasn't trying to necessarily disagree with you, Ashley. I just think what you're saying is you would be willing to accept something that is like a minimum that me in my life, in my very privileged life, I would consider way below my minimum. If people were just tolerating me, you know?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call that a minimum. What I am saying, I agree, we need more. We need much more. But I'll start with not being murdered. I'll start with transgender people not being murdered. I'll start with people I'd rather be ignored than be harmed. So if people are going to be harmful and hatred, I'd rather they just ignore us and pretend we don't exist because they do that anyway. But I mean, in general, yes, we need to move our culture in society into one of acceptance. And we do that by talking and having these conversations. We do that by educating people. A lot of people are afraid of what they don't understand. And so when you are able to educate people and have one-on-one conversations or conversations like this that are deep and impactful and show the human side of people, it usually resonates in a way that tends to be positive, and it allows us to build connections with people we might not have otherwise had the opportunity to do so with. So yes, we need to build our society to one of acceptance and love rather than just tolerance. But I'd really like to start with, you know, people stop murdering trans people. That's a really good place to start. I want more, and we deserve more. We deserve dignity and respect like everybody else. But for Christ's sake, stop killing us.
That's a good point. And your point is well taken. That, and especially for my journey, you start out with acceptance and tolerance. You move to cherish and celebrate, you know, and that's a good point. So it's a point well taken. So since we're talking here, and I have some great questions from some of my guys, from some of my Facebook friends. Again, if you have a question, guys, go ahead and post it in the feed. I'll post it live on video for them to answer here. But I have a great question here from Jeremy Harding, the Insanity is Free guy. And he asks, how much has tokenism impacted your political life both here and elsewhere? And tokenism, if I'm not mistaken, is the act of saying, like, this is my one gay friend, or this is my one trans friend, and this is my one, and I've got them, so I can say however much I want. You know, I would say a negative example is if you're a conservative and Candace Owens is your token black commentator, that maybe the tokenism might be enabling you a little bit, or whatever it may be. But has tokenism, I mean, impacted you in any way? Or are you happy to be the one token friend, and maybe that's where it starts and you move from there?
You want to go first, Ashley?
Sure. So, very rarely have I ever felt like a token. I could see the perception. I am one of the more outspoken trans individuals within the Libertarian Party. But I don't consider myself a token, and I'm always willing to take an opportunity to educate people and have conversations. So if I see that as an opportunity to educate people, to have a conversation with somebody, to be open to a new audience or new person that wouldn't have otherwise been exposed, I I'm always willing to take that opportunity because I believe that's how we do change the culture. We change it with hearts and minds. We change it one person at a time. Sometimes we get lucky and we get to speak to hundreds of people at once, which is great. Sometimes we have to do it on a one-on-one basis. For me personally, I'm always willing to take those conversations and do that because I know that by having those conversations, by teaching people, by educating people on issues and different terminology and how to be a better ally or a better friend or whatever it is that they're willing to learn, I know that that is what allows us to change the culture and make things better for the community. So personally, I don't pay much attention to the tokenism. I'm always willing to take an opportunity to talk, to teach, to learn.
All right, thank you. Mike, did you have anything to add to that?
I would just more or less echo what Ashley said. I mean, there aren't as many of us as there are of straight people. So a lot of times it may just be a function of like you're the only one that they know. So every time the word gay gets mentioned, they like tell you, they're like, I know a gay person, like, I don't know. I try not to lean into the fact. I mean, it does. I will tell you, sometimes it makes me feel a little bit otherized or just put in the spotlight because it's like, I didn't ask you to just disclose this to a room full of people that we just met. And I know that I'm out and brave and everything. And, the minute I start talking and waving my hands, you're going to tell anyway. But sometimes I'd like to disclose on my own terms or just not even need to disclose. Like, when do we get to a world where, I mean, do you come out as straight everywhere you go just to make sure people know, like, you don't, you know what I'm saying? So, but with that said, I try not to like lean into it because, I mean, I have a sense of history. I know where we're at. We aren't there yet. So it's going to be weird. It's going to probably be weird the rest of my life, and that's okay. I'm not going to attack the people around me for trying their best to work through that. We're all working through a really actually beautiful period of history together, and I try to stay focused on that.
Awesome. Before I get back to the questions here, I did want to ask, let's talk about coming out a little bit, because this is something that straight people don't have to do. It's a burden I have never had to carry because I just was what I was and everybody treated me that way and just assumed that way. And it is something to me that comes out with saying like, well, unless I'm actually having a sexual encounter with you, why do I need to know? And it's not that, and as opposed to saying I don't need to know, like, keep it to yourself, it's more like if you like Hawaiian pizza and I like pepperoni pizza and we're not splitting the pizza, who cares? And is this that could be the wrong way to view it, but it is just the way as a normie person, as a cisgender white Christian male in his world that has validated all of my things. Is that the right way to view it? And if not, I guess let's make it specific to you. What did coming out mean to you? Did you have to make a big event? What was your fallout from that? What was the pressure like before you came out? What was the pressure like after you came out?
I'll go first. We can take turns going first. Well, I came out in the early 90s. I graduated high school in 1993. And at the time, the idea of coming out, now, something I don't think many, especially modern activists, aren't quite aware of is that coming out was a political tactic from the early days of the movement. Like, it was understood that if we came out of the closet and our families and our bosses and our coworkers had to understand that they actually knew real gay people, and we weren't just these perverts slinking around in the alleys, snatching their babies for our, heinous satanic acts or whatever it was they thought we were. Then they would have to realize that we were human beings. But in the early days, like back then, you could get fired instantly, and a lot of people lost their jobs. It was considered it was the anarchists, the radical, the people that had nothing to lose because they were suffering already, who came out first. And that kind of started getting normalized through the 80s. And then in the 90s, it really took off because we started having Ellen DeGeneres and Madonna and stuff like that. And that was the culture in which I came out. So for me, it was, and I didn't really understand any of that. Like all of that nuance was lost on me. I just knew that, I remember in junior high, George Michael had one earring, and which ear was it on? And oh my God, what is he? And, I was still starting to think, wait a minute, does that word apply to me? Because I'm thinking some of the other boys in my class are cute. Wait, what does that mean? And I didn't have any much to talk about. Anyway, you asked what it meant for me. The internet was new then. And I started actually first talking to other people in AOL chat rooms and on this thing called the electronic forum that was at my community college. And I met some other young people like me. And we started going to after hours dance clubs together. And I remember feeling like finally for the first time in my life, I understood why I felt so different. And I started changing from thinking that was so shameful to finally realizing that was an okay thing to say out loud. So my actual outing was not voluntary. My brother printed out a journal that I was keeping on my computer that I got for graduation, went through it with a highlighter and took it to a high school football game and was passing it around. So someone handed that to my mom and she confronted me the next morning. So that happened, and that helped push me out of the closet. But
what did that do to you, not being able to do that on your own terms?
At the time I was mortified, and I remember my mom yelling at me, "It's because you got your ear pierced." My mom was so woefully misinformed. It was really sad. And, at the time it was terrifying. It actually, the story that I alluded to earlier that I might tell later if we don't run out of time, this is a big piece of that, because I took this whole ball of pain and darkness and shame and stuffed it inside myself. And what happens sometimes, at least for some of us, is that can really turn into, it can turn into anything from suicide to, in my case, it turned into addiction and other types of psychological problems that we then get blamed for, right? It's used as evidence to prove that queer people are psychologically unstable or mentally unbalanced or all of these things, but they're actually being inflicted on us. And I didn't have any way to process what just happened. I wasn't ready to come out. I didn't have an answer ready. I didn't have a narrative. The first person that I voluntarily came out to was probably between 3 and 6 months later. So it harmed me. But I will say in the long run, after 20 years of suffering through 2 decades of addiction, I did end up having this really beautiful reconciliation with my family. And ultimately it made a relationship stronger that was damaged for a long time. And I'm really grateful for that. But I wouldn't wish that you shouldn't have to go through all that to get your mom to love you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I went through a change in religion that was difficult for some people around me to accept, and it wasn't that bad. And it was still, I got to move states. I got to get out and leave all the comfort mechanisms I know. And yeah, you're in for a world of pain. So you turn to other comfort mechanisms, like you said, Mike, things that aren't necessarily healthy, but it's all you have. Ashley, let's turn to you.
Yeah, so coming out for me was one of the scariest experiences of my life. And it kind of started about a year before I came out. Um, I had a near-death experience that I had to take the time to reevaluate my life and realize, why am I so miserable? Why did this happen? What's going on with myself? And in that moment, I was able to figure out that, I've always had these feelings deep inside that I suppressed from childhood. Um, I knew that I was different when I was a child, but things happened that forced me to suppress that and hide that for many years. And finally, these feelings that were inside kind of just started blowing over. And so I slowly started telling people, hey, I think I might be trans, and I started figuring it out on my own, and um, I got ready to come out. When I came out, I am living in, and I was living in the same city that I grew up in. So many people here know who I am. I went to high school here, I went to college here, I worked many openly public jobs, working in a hospital. At the time that I came out, I was working in retail at a pharmacy. I was a pharmacy technician. So pharmacies are very popular in my community and everyone goes there. So my coming out, it's not only a surprise, but it was very public. Um, I came out on September 3rd, 2014 to everybody. That was the day I officially came out. And I ended up coming out that day because um, I was starting a new job actually, and I was planning on coming out on my birthday, which was September 18th. But because I was starting a new job, I thought, well, that's going to make it a lot harder if I go start this new job and 3 weeks later there's this change. And it's just going to throw everybody off. It's going to make it worse. It's going to be difficult. So I came out that day publicly. For me, it was very different than what most people do. Most people, when they come out, they move away, especially like trans people. They do it somewhere else. They do it far away from the people that they knew. A lot of times they've already started hormone therapy, and what happens is they're kind of forced to come out because their body starts changing. I hadn't started that process yet. I was just starting to see a therapist to start that process. So I didn't even start hormones for another 2 months after I came out. It was November when that happened. But I still remember how scared I was that day. Walking out of my house, I walked to work. It was like a quarter of a mile away from where I live. And I threw up 3 times on my way to work because I was just so afraid of what people were going to say, how they would react. Because here I am, this 6'2" former football player, well known in the community, somebody that's worked in the public. And it was, it's still, I still remember how afraid I was that day. And I walked into my job at the pharmacy and I worked the shift. And that first half hour, I was shaking like crazy. As the shift went on, some people were very complimentary. Most people just gave me looks like, who the hell is that? Why do you look different? Um, there weren't any negative comments directly to me. Um, those came online, of course, but in person, most people were really nice about it, uh, which shocked me. I was not expecting it. But I think most people realized that I was just trying to be a happier person and that I was still able to do the job that I was doing for them. I was liked at that job. I got along with a lot of people, and most people just were kind of like, okay, you're different, whatever, just give me my pills. So I then started a job that evening at a nursing home, and working in the nursing home was really great for me in affirming who I was because immediately I was accepted by the residents and seen as Ashley, which is who I was. And so I was lucky to have that experience where those people didn't know me. And so I kind of got that affirming thing where, people didn't know and they just accepted me for face value for who I was. I was really lucky to have that.
That's great. It's so hard for me, and I think a lot of other people, I think the reason these stories are important to share is because I know what fear is like, but I haven't had somebody had to fear my identity since maybe I was like 3 years old, and I was like, oh, I broke a vase. My mom might not love me anymore. My friends might not want to hang out with me because ultimately as we become adults, more of us we know that our actions and our identities aren't going to scare away our friends anymore. And this is something that I think gender and sexual minorities have, that they say, I have to do something for my own sake that is petrifying. I don't know how many of you listening to this. I know for me, when it became okay to be gay in the military, when it became, I guess I shouldn't say okay, but legalized, all those videos that came out with people deciding this is the time to tell my parents that I'm gay. And there was one video that I remember that really, really hurt to watch, where the kid wasn't even able to say it. He was just said, hey, Mom, Dad, I got something to tell you. And he just was crying and shaking. And she's like, what is it you got to tell us? Are you this? Are you that? Are you is this wrong? Is that wrong? And he just shook his head and couldn't talk. The mom actually had to say for you, is it that you're gay? And he nods, and she's like, sweetie, it's okay. And like, when she says it's okay, he cries, and he's like, I'm so glad you said it's okay. And it's something that I just think, like, I'm relieved for him. I know there's a bunch of other people whose parents say it's not okay, and it takes time, and there's a healing process, or at least we hope there's a healing process. But it is hard to watch. I think for me, that's something that makes a big impact to me. So I appreciate you guys sharing these stories. I really want to get back to the chat here, guys. I do have one more question just because we got on the subject. What are some microaggressions that you run into on kind of the day-to-day basis? And for those of you guys who don't know, a microaggression isn't, obviously if you're aggressive against somebody, that's just like, hey, F you, Ashley, F you, Mike. Very few people that dislike your guts say F you. Most of the time what they do is they do something that just makes you feel unwanted. A lot of times these microaggressions are coming from somebody like me that thinks they're being inclusive, that actually is just more like pointing out a zit on somebody's face, where you're like, boy, I really didn't want that pointed out. Thank you very much. But now I'm talking about it, and I think I'm being helpful, but I'm not. And this is something that I think will help a lot of people. So what are some microaggressions? We'll start with you, Ashley, and then go back to Mike. What are some microaggressions that you go through?
I don't go through a lot, but there are some things that do bother me. Terminology is really important, and there are certain terms that exclude somebody like me. I do not like the term guys to refer to a bunch of people, especially when there are women in that. And the term dude. The term dude is not gender neutral, despite what people might think. If you ask a straight guy if they would have sex with a dude or dudes, you'll find out real quick whether or not that's gender neutral. It's not. And so those types of terminology can be harmful. And they can be excluding. Other than that, most people that I talk to on a regular basis are usually really good. Most people are, I'm very out. People know that I'm trans. It's not some hidden secret with me. And so I think most people just understand that I am who I am, and they treat me well, at least most of the people that I interact with on a daily basis. There are some people who will purposefully try to misgender me, as a way to insult me, and, that's never okay either. It's just really important to be mindful of, who you're talking to and what you're saying. But for the most part, I don't really see a lot of microaggressions other than the terminology, the exclusive language that kind of makes being male the dominant thing in society, when really, just being human beings should be the dominant language in society. So rather than saying dudes or guys say something like y'all or all of you or people or humans or whatever. Just be more inclusive with language. I think that's something that we continuously need to work on. And that's not even just from a trans aspect, that's from an aspect of being a woman. I think we want to be included too. So
It's guys is a tough one because I have done it since birth. I know you and I in a chat before, I've been like, man, you know what that does? And I'm like, oh, man's not really a gender neutral term. I'm sorry.
yeah.
And you had the courage to correct me, and that's important. And I think it's good. It's hard because I find that social justice is in a very difficult place, because in order to achieve it, you have to stop it when you see it. And you have to be like, hey, I know you just said guys, and you're automatically, I know, like for me, you're automatically the douche for having to correct language, because you're just like, I'm not trying to be the police. I'm trying to be your buddy here, but it would make me feel better if you would please use this term instead. And sometimes they'll be like, oh man, I'm so sorry. I made you feel bad. That really wasn't my intent. And then the other half of the time they turn around, they're like, okay, sure. And then they roll their eyes to their friends and they're like, I'm going to use guy. And because it's a commitment to you that I was brought up using guys. So it's fine to call everybody guys. And it's not something that you change overnight, but it is something that you can work on. And then catch yourself doing it and say, you know what? I know for me, I try to say friends instead. Hey, they're friends instead of guys. But it is hard because it's just my default. Does that make sense, Ashley?
It does, and I think it's an education thing. People need to be, as we grow, language also grows and evolves, right? So, things that were once popular 20 years ago, words change, things change. We continue to evolve as people in a society, and it's a continuing of education. It's being willing and being open to being educated. I think that's a huge key. And so as language evolves and we evolve as people, it's really important to keep an open mind and be willing to learn. And as long as people are willing to learn, that's wonderful. And that's how we continue to make progress with anything in society, but especially with GSM issues and GSM rights and GSM acceptance.
Awesome. All right, Mike, let's turn it over to you. Microaggressions that you see or have experienced.
Well, it's funny. While you were talking, I was trying to think about it, and I realized, so microaggressions is the technical term for the way that language or just casual behavior that we don't think about very much is sort of packed into the cultural conditioning of just what's considered normal that we live with, right? And so I feel like my skin must be so thick at this point that, like, when I think of an example of microaggression, I'm thinking of like the Ryan Ramsey screenshots where he literally threatened to kill me. Like, that's a microaggression to me at this point. So I'm not sure my perspective is like, I operate in a historically right-wing party where people think, well, one of the main narratives is that you become the property of the business owner. You lose your bodily autonomy the minute you walk into this space that, they control using the magic piece of paper called the business license, right? Suddenly their rights take precedence over yours. And that's a normal narrative. Like, I have had to have conversations with the people again and again and again who will just talk right over me and tell me that, you all know the genre of work, and that's not really where I want to go with it, because then I thought, what I really want to do is back up from the concept of a microaggression, because I know I can hear the audience cringing, right? And I get it. Like, I'm not trying to like shame anybody who understands that like the rights of a business owner matter too. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm making it sound dramatic for the entertainment value, right? But I get it. There is like an interesting nuanced balance to be found there. That balance does not resolve itself by making, queer people the property of business owners, just to be clear. But let's back up a second, because what we really are talking about is trying to change the culture the way that Hodey talked about earlier. We need to transform our culture so that politics will follow. And I want to use an example that will probably resonate with right libertarians. if you think about the way that politicians use the term taxpayer, they associate the term taxpayer as like a good thing. Oh, I'm a good, loyal taxpayer, and that's why the police are here to protect me. And I'm a loyal taxpayer, and that's why those immigrants are stealing my job, right? Now, what's packed into that idea is that it's good to be stolen from, and that I should take that as a point of pride, that the government stole my money to harm other people so that we could be a taxpayer and wave our flag. And that's why the, bombs are going off on July 4th. Oh, and the drones are killing the people over there, right? So what are we doing to change that? Well, for one, we're using phrases like tax victim, right? You show right there with that idea. And instead of saying taxation, I see people say theft. If you change the assumptions that are packed into the language that you use, then you can change the culture. And so that is what this sort of social justice idea of changing the language that we use is designed to impact. It's not there to create a list. It's not a war on white men to make you say transgender instead of, whatever slur you thought was okay to use. No, what we're asking people to do is take personal responsibility for actively choosing your words carefully, so that you no longer pack the abuse of the state into your language inadvertently. So it's not a list of rules. Oh, what? I can't say this anymore. Oh no, now even the R word is wrong. Oh no, now I can't even say crazy anymore. And by the way, you should not be saying crazy. You should be using the words like bananas or nuts. Those are good ones. Wild, that's a good one.
You're discriminating against legumes here, Mike. I don't know.
I know. And I'm also, those are more words about ableism than queer issues. But you get my point, right? I guess I wanted to clarify that for people. Like, there's no language police. There's no imaginary pronoun jail where all these people are locked up. You're not a bad person. We all grew up in a world where authority is the norm. We're all conditioned to that. We all get it. I still say words that are considered microaggressions accidentally. Like you just mentioned, what was the one example you just used a couple of minutes ago?
Guys,
transsexual. I'm
yeah.
still working on that one. I catch myself more often, but I still do it sometimes. And that's okay. We're not here to cast a bunch of guilt for the world we live in. We're here to take responsibility for the future. And that's what that dialogue is all about.
Right. A microaggression doesn't have to be against a minority. I think this is the way I try to explain it to people who are unsure about it. It's anything that makes you feel bad that they didn't mean to make you feel bad for, or you just say, oh, I guess I had a zit there. Thanks for that, guys. Or my hair, oh, I got a cowlick in the back of my hair. Like I used to feel the worst. I've embraced it now, but I'm bald, right? Like I used to feel terrible for being bald. And so people would call it out and they're not trying to hurt my feelings, but it sucked. I didn't want to be bald in high school, it was no fun. But, and so it's something that you can kind of understand. Great example. Obama was talking about how people cling to their God and their guns. And that made you feel bad. Now, he didn't say F God or F guns, but he's talking about people clinging to him. It's just kind of one of those things that doesn't make you feel good as a God believer or a gun owner, right? And this is kind of the same thing when we talk about gender and sexual minorities, that we just say these are things that we can just do away with, that we can, try if you can to kind of upgrade your language a little bit. There's nothing wrong with upgrading. We start off not being able to speak at all. Hopefully we learn a lot. And we're all still learning a lot, and we can continue to learn. So I think that sometimes people are very hesitant to change and say, no, I'm going to say guys if I feel like it. You got the Ben Shapiro's out there, but I want to get to that in a minute. Let's go back to the chat. I promised you guys I would. All this was sparking so many great questions for me. Mike, we'll start with you again. Can you give, this is from Eden 956. Eden 956, can you give an example of how you've educated someone? You got to pick one, Mike.
Gosh. I don't even know. that is for one thing, that is a huge part of what we have to do at Outright Libertarians and what we've been doing for years. Okay, here's a great example. One of the most transformative moments that we had is when we kind of realized that one of the big barriers that was standing between us and full acceptance in this party was this notion that social issues don't have anything to do with libertarianism, because libertarianism deals with the non-aggression principle and bigotry is not force. And so, gay marriage is, we're all free now. We're post bigotry, right? The rest of it is kind of your problem. If you don't like it, don't eat the chicken sandwich, but don't talk to us about it, right? There's nothing else to do here. We can just go back to ignoring what's really going on. And that's just absolutely not the case. The state is completely involved in prohibiting blood transfusions for men who have sex with men. It's completely involved in singling out HIV positive immigrants and subjecting them to deportation. It's completely involved in assigning you a gender at birth and holding you in compliance to that gender your entire life without your consent. It's completely involved in, a giant list of things. So we created this flyer called Get Your Laws Off Our Backs. And it just took the non-aggression principle, and we thought of everything we can think of where the law, the state is continuing to initiate coercive force or fraud in the lives of gender and sexual minority people. And we passed that flyer out. The first time that flyer went out, I believe it was, I believe it would have been I think it might have been 2016. I think it might have been Orlando, the year Gary Johnson happened. It might have been Columbus in 2014, but I don't think it was. I think it was during that term. Anyway, my point is, the example of that is a primary example, because that flyer opened so many doors. I remember people running up to me on the convention floor after that and being like, "Oh my gosh, this is brilliant! I never thought about this, but thank you." And, state chairs were reaching out, asking for copies of it, talking through the list and learning. Can you tell me a little bit more about this so that we can train our volunteers? And that flyer has also helped people over their outreach booths. So when libertarians are actually speaking, we went from basically sort of economics geeks, kind of, cis-splaining at queer people over the outreach booth about taxation as theft, to them being knowledgeable and being able to break down step by step how exactly the state is initiating harm in your life. And that was such a pivotal, so that's an example. That's kind of a meta, because it contains so many other ones. But anyway, that's my
great example. Ashley, to you, time that you've educated somebody. Oh, Ashley, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. Sorry.
Okay. You're good. You're fantastic.
So an example of when I educated somebody, you've already given 2 examples tonight where I've educated you. But I'm going to, rather than give somebody an example of education, I'm going to give you all an education right now. One issue that's really important, especially to the trans community, is the issue of identification. The idea that the government should be able to tell people what your gender is, I think that's something that's private. I believe that, and I'm sure you all believe, there's a reason we have what are called privates, and that is because they are private. So never should an employer or a cop or whoever know what's in your pants. I don't think that's pertinent to anything in the world. And so one big piece of thing that I like to talk about is the removal of gender completely from identification. It's not necessary. It might be necessary in some aspects of healthcare. It is not necessary in any aspect of the real world. It only gives the government or whoever is looking at your ID the ability to discriminate against you for one reason or another, to determine whether you're male or female, or whatever. So its only useful tool is a tool of discrimination, not identification. It's antiquated. It's something that's useless in our society. People who get upset about the gender X thing, it's nobody's business. Nobody should know what your gender is. And so I'm in favor of gender X, but in reality, I'm more in favor of getting rid of gender on your identification altogether. And anybody who's against the government knowing your business, well, you should be in favor of that too.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and it's something that actually is a great segue into something that I have to mention because I see some devolving in the comments, guys. Be nice, okay? Be nice to each other. Look, here's the thing. This is not a Democratic, we're not trying to say vote for the Democrats or vote for the Republicans. I'm seeing a lot of that right now. Like what we're talking about here is something about why the Democrats are better than the Republicans or something like that. Ashley mentioned something that libertarians are big on. This is, why do we need that ID? And Mike even said it in his too. Why do I need it on the birth certificate, right? Who does this matter for? Why does the government need you to identify you by what's in your pants? Why do they need to identify you on the chromosomal level? So often we talk about what the government needs to know. If you're a libertarian, you probably say nothing. But if you're a small government person, you probably say the less the better, right? I mean, of any type. And this is really something that they don't need to know about. They don't need to know it for purposes of identification. Ashley mentions it's maybe something that you'll have to work on with your healthcare provider at times. Maybe there's a question we'll get to later that we talk about athletic sports that I imagine we'll talk about it a little bit there too. But for now, guys, this is not a pro-Democrat page. Believe me, both these two and myself are actually very, very, very active in the libertarian movement. These two are actually both running or have run for Libertarian National Committee positions before. So you're speaking to the wrong crowd if you think this is turning into a Democrat or Republican talk. It is neither of those things. We are not looking to the government for answers. We're looking to become the answers, and that's the whole reason I'm having this conversation, is so that you can be a person who is part of the answer instead of talking about which party gets to decide what those answers will be. Okay. And moving on to the next question here. Hold on. All right, from Darren. I think both of you guys know Darren. Good guy. Ashley, you paved the way for others. Did you or Mike have a story about someone who emboldened you to come out? Ashley, I'm still going to start with you because I don't think you mentioned that. Was there anybody or something that you read that emboldened you to come out?
No, there wasn't a particular person or influence that helped me come out. I came out because for me it became a matter of life or death. I was at a point in my life where I again had an incident. At the time I was working 2 jobs. I worked 7 days a week. And after finishing a 45-day stretch, I took a few days off. Went home one night and started drinking with a roommate, and we opened up a bottle of scotch, which was wonderful. And so we had some scotch, and I was, just feeling like, hey, I should drink some more. I feel like drinking. And I ended up drinking an entire bottle of Crown Royal, 750, in about 10 minutes. And I ended up in the hospital with a BAC that was close to 0.5, which, if anybody looks it up, that usually kills you. So I had this moment where I realized that I was unhappy in life, and that if I didn't do something, if I didn't address the feelings that I had inside, that I'd been bottling up for years, if I didn't finally just figure out who I was, then I wasn't going to be around much longer. My life would end. And so for me, it was a life or death decision. It was, I need to accept and be who I'm going to be, or I need to not be here anymore because I can't keep living with this pain and trying to be something I'm not. And again, this ate at me for years where nobody had any idea. And so for me, there wasn't a particular person that influenced me. It was more like, well, I'm not ready to die yet. And so it was time to come out.
No, that's great. I've struggled with suicide myself before, and it is one of those where you just say, well, I either jump off the bridge or I make a massive change, but I appreciate you having the bravery to not die. And I'm glad you came back from the BAC. That 0.5 is great.
Yeah. And at that point, that wasn't even an intentional, like, trying to harm myself. That was just an incident that happened. Like, there was no, I didn't go into it thinking, yeah, I'm just going to drink this and drink myself to death.
Sure.
I don't drink a lot in general, but like once a year I would get drunk. But I just like felt like drinking because I started drinking and it tasted good, and I was like, I'm going to drink some more, and I just kept drinking. And, it happened. It wasn't even, this isn't something I would even consider like a suicide attempt. Maybe in the back of my mind, I was miserable and angry and hurt, and, yeah, maybe internally it was something like that, but like there was no intention of that in this particular instance. And so it was me just waking up in the hospital and realizing, what the hell did I just do? Why did I almost die? And what can I do to not ever have this happen again? And so, I've had, my own personal issues with suicide in the past, and that's a story for another time. But in this particular case, it wasn't even me trying to harm myself. It was more me just, an incident happens, and it just kind of made me realize that I needed to make big changes in my life, or suicide would be something that would come along.
Yeah, that's like I said, I am glad you made it through and you're still here and you're still educating. Mike, how about you? Somebody that may have emboldened you to come out.
So I'll answer it both ways. Because if I look back, I think that first of all, a decision to come out is not one that is made lightly. It, just the definition of what that means is that up until that point, there's this deep sort of secrecy surrounding this thing, and the shame and the fear and the sort of the secrecy, it's constructed around it. It's a protective, because the system of oppression that we're trying to protect ourselves from is invisible. It's more powerful than we know, and it's you can't really see it. You just know that it's there, and its most visible forms are the bashings and the bullying and all of that. But there's so much more behind it, right? So my point is, you don't just wake up one day and go, oh, you inspired me, I'm going to come out now. Even though it is absolutely true that there will have been inspirational figures, people that and some of them may be more influential than others. When I try to look and think about who those individuals were, there isn't any really single person that stands out for me. And I think in the same way, when I think about people I've known who came out after me, when you're perceived as a leader, and you have a platform that you've built and people listening to what you say, I do get all kinds of positive feedback from people who've been inspired. And I've never been told I came out because of you. But I have had people that came out to me first, because they just felt safe and wanted, to break the ice with somebody familiar before they did somebody more difficult, or somebody that they were more scared of to come out to. So I guess all I can say to everybody is, if you're sort of bold about living your truth, and be very real there, because, and this is actually, I don't know, am I talking too much? Now that it's been 20 years of active addiction, and now I'm so clean and spiritual now, it's impossible to I guess what I want to tell people is that the truth that's at the core of being out, the lie that's being inflicted on us, is a thing that can make us sick, because living in a perpetual lie is living in a perpetual darkness. And the effect of that on the human psyche, I can't even express to you how sick it can make a human being to have to live in a lie like that. Like it's like inflicting that on a human being. Like the fact that the closet exists is an incredibly gross form of like imprisonment. Like it's essentially an invisible prison that the person lives in by choice to protect themselves, where they're actually being stifled and killed and suffocated by the darkness and the secrecy. So if you're living out your truth and you're willing to be open about it, please continue to let that light shine, because you really are a beacon of freedom for people who you don't even know are watching you. So please remember that.
Yeah.
Can I speak to that real quick?
Absolutely. So
what Mike is saying is so true, and I learned this firsthand experience last year. We have in my hometown an annual parade called the Fall Foliage Parade. It takes place the first weekend of October, and it actually took place the week after I went to DC for the National Transgender Visibility March. So we have this parade, and I was contacted by local members of the community that said, hey, we have an LGBTQ group that is going to be marching. Would you like to join us? And I said, absolutely, I'd love to be a part of that. So I took my flag, the one right behind me here, and I showed up, and I stood there waiting. I showed up about an hour early because, people get ready for the parade route and all of that. And I was the first one there, and so I'm waiting, and I'm just, kind of finding my spot. And about 30 minutes beforehand, I start messaging people because I'm still the only one there, and people are like, hey, where is everybody? Who's coming? Like, how are we doing this? Still trying to figure this out. And about 10 minutes before the parade starts, it turns out that I'm the only one that's going to be there. And so I had to make the decision, do I participate in this march alone and do this by myself, or do I pack up my flag and go home? And I made the decision to march, and I made the decision to go forward. So 2 spots ahead of where my group was supposed to be was our local NAACP chapter. And they realized that I was there alone, and they asked, would you like to join us and march with us so you're not alone, which was great, and I did. And it was a great experience. But, I was there representing, the GSM community, and I had my big rainbow flag, the one behind me. And I've had so many people tell me about how meaningful that was to them in my own community, to see that, I was still willing to do that by myself, to be that representative, to wave my flag proudly the whole route. And towards the end of the route, we actually, there were these 2 teenagers in high school. They were yelling out to me. They were wearing pride. Pride flags as capes. It was really cute. And so they're yelling out to me to get my attention because they see the rainbow and they get all excited, right? And so they're really happy, and I stop real quick and say hello, and then I invite them to finish the route with me. And so they come out of the crowd and finish the rest of the parade route with me, holding hands, because they were a couple. And for them, that was the first time they'd ever participated in anything Pride-like. It was the first time they'd done anything out together. And one of them happened to be a young trans man that was literally their coming out moment as a couple and coming out moment publicly. And they said, we would have never done that, but seeing you go out there with your flag and do what you were doing, it made us feel safe. And so we were happy to join you. So yeah, sometimes just showing up and doing things, being visible, people do see you, even if they don't say anything, but it really does make a huge difference to other people around you. Not everybody's going to say something, and I'm still getting messages from different people in my community who will talk to me about that. I still have people who will say, oh, I saw one of your posts on Facebook about this, and thank you for speaking up. And I'm like, oh, well, you're welcome. So being visible and being out there is really important for coming out and changing things in society. And it really does make a bigger difference than you realize. Not everybody's going to tell you what kind of impact you're making on them, but it truly can change lives.
Yeah, having an impact isn't necessarily something that occurs in the heat of the moment. Very few people change their minds about something instantaneously. What happens is you know somebody, you even disagree, you chew on it a little bit, you kick the theory around in your head. I know this is the way it works for me. And when somebody else was right, about 3 months later, I'll be like, okay, they were right, fine. Something that I want to talk about now, there's a question that came up here, and I want to not hide everybody's face here, but basically it's about athletics. But what I want to do is piggyback. I want to add on to this question because I think it goes into the general. This is something that I had to recover from, was when somebody told me what the gay agenda was. I didn't realize it. The worst is when you hear a non-Christian explain what Christianity is. The worst is when you hear a white person explain, a white person explain what it's like to be black. And in a similar fashion, I did not realize I was listening to what the gay agenda was from not gay people, from cisgender straight people. And it's like, oh, well, come on, man. Like, you're not helping me at all. Like, that's not what it actually is. So I wanted to piggyback onto that. You can address the athletic question if you would like, because I think it's pertinent. And I mean, I'll even tack on one more thing to the question about men's and women's sports, is like affirmative action. I know my dad was an employer, and it's funny because he was actually very encouraging of diversity in the community, but he told me a story one day, and he was in engineering, where you get 1,000 papers from male applicants and 20 applications from female applicants. And they would tell him to hire 10 from each pile. And some people would say, well, then, I mean, he was actually in aerospace at the time. And he's like, so if I hire the not best people, things blow up and people die. And so, but at the same time, it is important to get that female perspective in our community, in our workplace, in our program. Sometimes if you have a lot of smart people, but they all tend to think the same way, you're going to get no aspect of creativity, and you're not going to be able to make any advancements. So I do want some diversity. It's not just an IQ test to get the best jobs, but at the same time, there's a balance there. So so Ashley, we'll start with you, but when you hear about things like affirmative action, equal housing, bake the cake, men and women's sports, is this the agenda of the GSM community? And what, if not, what is the GSM agenda to you?
So the GSM community only has one agenda, and that's to have equal access to the market. So a lot of right-wing people will talk about the free market and how important it is to have a free market. We just want to be able to participate in the same market that you are. We want to follow the same rules that you're following. We want to not be excluded just because we're different. Now, when it comes to things like, I specifically want to address the athletic question because this is something that people don't understand. There are very strict guidelines for transgender athletes competing in sports. And the Olympics has come up with a very specific set of guidelines. It requires a certain amount of time on hormones. And after a certain time on hormones, the body begins to physically change. Muscle mass actually changes. Your body changes. For example, for me, I changed right here. Those didn't exist 5 years ago. They do now. It's hormones. It changes the physical shape and being of your body. And so a lot of transgender women in particular, when they take hormone therapy, their testosterone levels are actually lower than other women. And so after a certain period of time, the competitive advantage of being biologically born a different sex, it goes away. It goes away because your body completely changes. It ends up transforming in a way. Hormones reshape muscle mass. It adds fat to different places. It changes so much of your physical composition that the advantage kind of goes away. in most cases. Now, what does that mean in terms of participation in sports? It means that if somebody goes through that process and their hormones are, at the level that is recommended, if they line up with other women, they should be allowed to compete with other women. Transgender men are allowed to compete against men immediately. So, like, a lot of issues when it comes to transgender issues, the bathrooms, all of that stuff, it's always attacked at the women, right? So, like, and I think part of that is a society problem where men are seen as better than or more than women. And so for a trans man to want to be a man, it's an upgrade in society's view. But a man could never understand why somebody would be a woman or want to be a woman or feel like a woman. They don't understand that concept because they're too wrapped up in their testicles to understand that people feel things differently. So, for the GSM community, our only agenda is not to take anything away from you. We're not looking to take away your rights. We're not looking to tell you that you have to do this or you have to do that. We're looking to participate in the society. When I go to a bakery, I just want to buy a cake. Now, personally, if you had a custom cake that you didn't want to make for me, I would go somewhere that would make me a custom cake. If you told me that I couldn't come into your store at all and buy any cakes, those are two different scenarios where one, I have a problem with, which is the latter, and the former, well, you're going to lose my money, I'm going to go elsewhere. And so for me, my agenda is just to be treated like a human being and have equal access to the society and the markets that are out there. I want to be able to get health care without being discriminated against. If I'm sick, I should be able to go and get treated just like you. Somebody shouldn't be able to refuse me just because I'm different. That's not how healthcare is supposed to work. That's not how you take care of human lives. When it comes to housing, I should be able to live in an apartment. And if all of my qualifications match up and I want to buy a house or I have the money to rent or anything else, what I do in my personal life has nothing to do with whether or not I should be rented to or not, right? So, like, I deserve, and as a human being, you deserve, and we all deserve to be treated equally in that regard. And so it's really important to understand that, by denying people access to the market, you are causing harm. That is a harmful practice. It hurts people. It may not hurt you because it doesn't affect you, but it's hurting other people. And as a libertarian, specifically, we believe in not harming other people, right? Live your life as you choose and don't hurt others. And so by not letting us participate in the free market, one, it's no longer free. And two, you're causing harm. So there's a balance there. And it's important to just treat everybody with dignity and respect and not judge people based on who they are as individuals, what they look like. Judge somebody by their character and their actions. If somebody is being a terrible person, don't associate with them, right? So, like, there is a balance and a line that gets crossed too often. But in general, our agenda is to be treated with dignity and respect, to be seen as human beings, and to be able to have the same access to the same things in society that you do. It's that simple.
You bet. Mike, does that resemble the bananas agenda that you have?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I think all cishet people should be placed in gulags and re-educated to the gospel of drug parties and orgies. No, I'm just kidding. So As a matter of fact, first of all, I want to touch on, I'm going to make a comparison here to how like gross some of the speech around the pandemic has been. So we have people who think that because a politician opportunized an issue to force people to wear masks, therefore we should label every epidemiologist and other scientist it with a single brush of tyranny and run around apparently like licking doorknobs and like coughing on each other on purpose to prove that don't tell me what to do. And you're probably like, wait, why did you just go on a tirade about COVID? Well, I'll tell you, these sports leagues that are adjusting their policies and updating them for the reality of transgender athletes are making those decisions. They're not making these decisions, at gunpoint of the gay agenda, the trans agenda, whatever you want to call it. They're making those decisions. It's their business to run sports leagues that are fun to play in. Their market value is determined by how well they manifest a competitive environment that everyone can compete in, that's allowed to compete, right? They make these decisions with doctors, with health clinicians, with nutritionists. Like, they're getting expert advice is my point before they're making decisions. And Ashley did a great job of going into the details of what hormones do and why they aren't, why it's okay for people to compete with each other. So I want to take that away. For one, a league is a market provider. They're providing competitive sports as a service. And so if they're making this decision in consultation with medical experts, the state's already not involved in that. So the idea that that's a gay agenda that from the state that you need to like panic about is also wrong. But I would suggest that the contrarian impulse and the anti-authoritarian impulse are two completely different things. And we need to be very clear what we're reacting to and whether we're sort of doing a reactionary, like just manifesting the opposite to just prove a point because we can, or whether our critique is really based in something that's valid. And on transgender athletes and a variety of other things, I would say that it's not. Beyond that, I don't think that there's a single quote gay agenda because, and this is actually, as long as I'm critiquing libertarians, I'll just go all the way. If y'all would have stood on the gender and sexual minority plank from the 70s, if y'all would have actually like led the path, like supposedly we did, then the Democrats would have never stolen the gays because they didn't get on board with that until the social shift was done. But members of this party who wanted to get small government conservative votes so bad that they thought gay people and transgender people were embarrassing the party, they put that plank on the far back burner and shamed anybody who wanted to talk about it as a radical, as someone who wanted to have a debate club, as an anarchist or a libertine. They said that we were doing sex parties at the convention. To be clear, some people were. And guess what? Good. If we would have stood on that plank all along, it would have been different. And you wouldn't be sitting here 40 years later going, oh my God, they're making me bake a cake, because we would have had that narrative from the beginning. But no, we failed to do that. So not to blame the victims, because we're all victims of the fact that the Democratic Party did somehow steal that issue and they now dominate the narrative. And the reality is, when the Democratic Party dominates the social narrative, their answer is force. So now there is what you could, let me rephrase it. I don't want to legitimize the idea of a gay agenda, because that's a lot like a Jewish agenda or some other weird conspiracy. Like, it's not like that. But it is true that politicians, once they grab hold of something and run with it, they screw it up. It gets worse. And that part, that kernel of reality is really happening. Yeah. Politicians got involved and now it sucks. But the takeaway, my point of all this is that the answer is to not like write gender and sexual minority people off as lost, or to somehow assume that like we chose to get, picked up by the state and used as a political football. No, all we're trying to do is like get free of a pre-existing status system that was already ruining our lives. So if you could get out in front of that ball with us, which is what we're asking this party to do, and we've come great lengths in the past, 5 or 10 years towards that. So thank you. But that's what we really need to do. Like, get out in front of these narratives, abolish the driver's license. If it's harming if it's harming transgender people, abolish it, because it's harming everybody else too in different ways. So you build coalition that way. You're not doing identity politics. You're abolishing a central piece of the control grid. Like, that is a win. That is a win. So I think being able to like see it in terms of like that we really are all fighting together against the same authoritarian institution that's ruined everybody's lives. And the way that it ruins gender and sexual minority lives is just one more argument against it. And it's a really good argument right now. It has traction. The general public, we have a lot of allies right now. So why not like run with it? I think it's just, for me, it's smarter politics than what Paleo ever had to offer us. That's just me.
Yeah, no, these are great, and they are great. We got about 30 more minutes here. One thing that I did want to talk about, and there's a few questions that are dealing with this, just because I think our last question kind of touched on it. It is difficult as a libertarian when you see something like the Supreme Court legalizes gay marriage, where you just say, well, I love that gays can do whatever they want, but this is the government doing it. And so you, Mike, you even mentioned the contrarian versus authoritarian spirit. Which one are we right now? And I think it's a difficult place to be in. There's a lot of cart before the horse on this one. We say, what's the right thing to do to lead to a freer society? I'm going to turn this back to you, but let me propose some ideas that I've had in my head and things that I still don't quite have fleshed out. There are a lot of libertarians who still don't want drugs to be legalized until healthcare, public healthcare is repealed. And the reason being is because I don't want to pay for somebody's drug overdose. And so I'm fine with them doing drugs until I have to pay for it. So you repeal this and then you get what you want, right? And so when we talk about like bake the cake or, all these initiatives that are saying, yes, this is the government intruding to try to do some equality. Or, affirmative action is another one that I brought up to say that this is the government interfering too, because I think what I agree with, and I don't like almost anything the government does, but what I do agree with is that we are not going to get to a place of equality by doing nothing. So it is going to require some intentional acts. So what is something that maybe you see, I guess, how do you see these victories when the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage? Do you see it as a victory, defeat? How do you see it? And when somebody says, oh, sorry, business, you're not allowed to discriminate against gay people, do you see that as a win, a loss? How do you balance the GSM part of you with the libertarian part of you? Because I think that is something that libertarians struggle with as far as just I think some of us say, well, I accept them, but I'm okay with these laws that permit them to discriminate, because if we can't discriminate, then all of a sudden I can't discriminate against disreputable people. I lose the same tool that enables me to say, hey, no Nazis here, if you make it so that I can't say, hey, no black people here, that type of thing. Mike, I'll start with you and then we'll go to Ashley.
So the marriage thing, Outright was definitely caught in the middle of that one. And it's almost ironic because part of my, I guess, my activist identity is like, standing up for radicalism, but in that case, like the marriage equality narrative was being framed by many small government conservatives who you would think would have been the pragmatic ones, the small, as all right, you know what? I don't want to relive the logic of it. Let me just scale down what I was going to say. It is absolutely true that when marriage between same-sex people is banned by force, so that's a prohibition, and you take away that prohibition, you have reduced the scope of government. There is one less prohibition on the books than there was before. So that was an abolition. They took law away. That is just objectively a libertarian outcome. Now, the argument at the time was, well, more people are going to have access to the divorce courts and family law, and that means the government got bigger. And this is an important thing to let sit in, because this can actually happen when government gets involved with both mandates and prohibitions. It distorts the shape of like the society that we live in. And because it's distorted and twisted out of shape in this funhouse kind of way, you can actually reduce the scope of government and have the size grow and have that still be libertarian. And now, to be clear, it's not anarchist. That is marriage controls. And by the way, there's still a prohibition on marriages involving more than two people. So there are still prohibitions on the books. But I digress. That's what was going on with that issue. So the framing on why that was libertarian, marriage equality is a minarchist, really. It's kind of like, it's a pragmatic, it's a step in the right direction. Obviously, abolishing state marriage altogether would be another really helpful step to get the state out of all of our families would be nice, right? But until it's out of everyone's families, then at least we should have the freedom to contract regardless of our gender. The other one you brought up was, non-discrimination. I've morphed on this because I still don't think that, how do I put it? The reality is right now we have a state. We have an institution whose job, in theory, is to protect the economy that we're in so that we can all trade freely, right? That's the so-called promise of a limited government free market, is that it's making it possible for us all to trade. And think about what it is to trade. Like that is one of the most fundamental human instincts. It's why, commerce and trade predate modern economic systems by, millennia. Humans started doing that like the instant they started meeting humans from other places that they didn't know already. They started trading shells and beads. Like, it's just a natural thing. We do it by instinct. You don't need a special system to make that possible, right? But my point is, being denied. If someone says they won't trade with you, like, just think of that primitive, like, that's an act of war. Wait, you won't trade my shells with me? I guess we're not friends. Like, where's my spear? That is like when you experience a denial of service, it isn't just hurt feelings. Like, depending on, where you're at in that moment and how badly you need that good or service, it can have severe quality of life issues. So, I think I'm coming around to where I would be on marriage equality. As long as the government is telling us what our market should look like and you're operating in that marketplace, you're benefiting from the security monopoly. You're benefiting from the roads and streets that we all paid for. Then I think it's okay to make sure that space is available to be traded by all. So that's where I'm at on that one.
Before I go back to Ashley, just real quick, Mike. Let's say, for example, we're talking about for example, there's 3 golf clubs in the United States that don't allow black people, and there's 100 that don't allow white people because they're black only golf clubs. Do you see what I'm saying here? Like, what's okay with one? Is it okay with the other? Because one's getting denied and the other's getting accepted. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, is there a problem?
Say that again.
So there's 3 golf clubs in the United States that won't let you join if you are black, right? Because they're racist. There's 100 golf clubs in the United States they won't let you join if you're white because it's a black members golf club. And generally, in society, at least my conditioned thinking is that the anti-black one is not okay, but the anti-white one is okay because they're getting their own thing going on. It does feel like I haven't made sense of it in my head if there's a philosophy at play here that makes one okay and not the other. But when you say, an act of discrimination, I'm like, well, what if I discriminate against white people?
Okay. So I have an example that I use in this case. And by the way, I see the person who, Mr. Abernathy, I'm sorry, I don't know your gender, Abernathy. That denial of service being an act of war, that example was like to the tribal, like primitive culture. Like, if you want to trade my shells for your beads, then I'm going to grab my spear because you've just shown me that like my tribe and your tribe are not friends. Do you see what I mean? I'm saying there's an instinctual like thing going on there. So anyway, just wanted to clarify that. I have an example that I use. And there was this, there was a leather bar in, yes, I did have long hair for a long time and I still flip it over my ear. I don't know why. There was a leather bar in Denver, and Denver has one of these non-discrimination laws, and their dress code. So let's think about what a leather bar is. This is a place where gay and bisexual men gather to fetishize masculinity, right? So they had a dress code, and a drag queen came to the door. So this is a feminized presentation of a male body. And they were like, you're not in our dress code. You can't come in. So she sued under the non-discrimination ordinance and she won. Now, if you really want to like go down the rabbit hole, you can think about that the desire to fetishize masculinity is itself perhaps a product of internalized misogyny. And there's definitely, you know, a rabbit hole you can go down depending how far you want to go down, whether there's an injustice built into that or not. But the fact, I think, is still there that it doesn't really matter how my fetishes got here. I'm stuck with them now. If I want to be in a room with a bunch of other men fetishizing masculinity, and we need leather and everything else to do that, because when we start talking and waving our hands, the illusion is just shattered. You know, I think that it's okay to do that. So to answer your question, Hodey, I don't think there needs to be like a single, like you're saying it's arbitrary. How can it be arbitrary? Well, it is arbitrary in the sense that white people have historically held power over black people. We live in a white supremacist society. So enacting white supremacy is wrong because there's all kinds of injustice attached to it. And that flows into police brutality and all kind, you know, economic harms, denial of intergenerational wealth through redlining. I mean, there's like a whole list of things that's attached to that. But when you flip the script and you're people of color or gay and bisexual men are just trying to like have a space to like exist within the hell that is that outside world, that's what makes it okay. And is there a clear defining principle? No, it's kind of just arbitrary. One kind of discrimination is disgusting. One is an act of survival. And I don't know how to give you a clear principle why they're different, but they are.
I think telling people to trust their judgment is a very libertarian and informed judgment. So Ashley, let's flip it over to you. You've been very patient. Thank you. What would you have to say about this?
Yeah, so discrimination is always a difficult topic, but the government cannot discriminate. The government is there to represent all people. And therefore, if the government is making rules or has control over a market or an industry or whatever, then everybody under the law of government should have the same access and freedom to participate. So as far as marriage is concerned, yeah, everybody over the age of consent should be allowed to marry whoever they want. As far as government is concerned, we need to get it out of as much as possible. So government shouldn't even be making decisions about marriage. But as long as they are, it should be open to all consenting adults who wish to marry another person. When it comes to anti-discrimination in business, If government is involved in the regulation of your business, then we should all have access to it because the government represents all of us. The government shouldn't have rules for different sets of people, period. They represent all of us. The rules should be the same. And even without government, as a society, we should be able to have the same standards for everybody based on the fact that they're human beings. And so that's where I stand on the issue. And as long as government is going to continue to be involved and continue to make rules and regulations for different things, then they need to be applied equally to everybody, period.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. So we're not done talking yet. I'm gonna give you each final thoughts, and you can go on for as long as you want about your final thoughts. But just any information that didn't get out there in the course of this conversation that you want to make sure gets out there, we're gonna do here in just a second. I do want to let everybody know that after this is over, we will be having a meetup on We're Libertarians, between We're Libertarians and Team Supreme. It's actually going to be on Zoom, and you will be invited to go. I can't find a way to copy the link just yet, but it'll be in the comments, and we'll be talking after the show. So if you have any questions for me, I believe Ashley will be there. Mike is certainly invited. Desiree, thank you, has kindly shown me the Facebook link. So if you're on Facebook, that's where you go. I am aware that this is not all going to be, and Desiree and I talked about this before the show. There's a lot of people listening right now that aren't necessarily friendly or are just confused about the subject or have more questions. And we talked about this. We encourage you to attend as imperfect or perfect as you are. We will be happy to answer them for you. I cannot stress to people how important it is to show up and ask questions and find out, even though you are an imperfect person. I am an imperfect person. I am today imperfect, even on this issue. I am doing this to generate awareness so that you see the cultural changes that we need to make for actual people. This isn't some idea. This isn't some philosophy that exists outside the parameters of humanity. And I would love you to join if you can. Again, that's the link there. I'll leave it up for just a minute here if y'all need to type it in. There's the actual Zoom meeting. Thank you again, Desiree. I'll leave that up for a minute. But Ashley, whatever you want to say, take it away.
So first, I want to thank anybody who's listening and watching for taking the time to be a part of this conversation. Thank you, everyone who asked questions. There's a lot more to digest when it comes to the GSM community. Even among the GSM community, there's division. The trans community is not fully accepted within the GSM community. There are a lot of lesbian, gays, and bisexuals who don't accept trans people. There are a lot of lesbians and gays that don't accept bisexual people. So even amongst the community, there's division in acceptance and tolerance of different people. And what we need to do as a society is come together and be willing to listen. If we can have conversations, it can change so many things. If we can learn to listen to each other, even if we don't agree, if we can learn to be respectful and kind, even when we don't agree, if we can even learn to become friends, because, hey, we're good people, but we have different views on things. Those are all things that lead to a better society. We're at a point in our history where we are so divided by politics and different ideas, and we're so angry at other people for thinking differently. And in some cases, rightfully so. In some cases, very rightfully so. There are a lot of people that are angry. Anyone who has to defend their right to be a human, anyone who has to defend their right to justice, anyone who has to defend their right to live without being harmed, yeah, they're going to be very angry, and rightfully so. And that's the world that we live in right now. There's a lot of angry people. But anger can turn into something more beautiful. And that's conversation and talking to each other. We can't just continue to ignore each other. We can't just continue to be angry. Action has to come from that anger. And if we can go into it with a positive mindset, and I know how difficult that is, but for somebody like me who can have conversations and does have conversations on a regular basis with people who are usually very anti trans, by going in with the mindset of, if I can teach you something new and you can walk away with that, maybe you'll be less angry. Maybe you'll be less likely to hate me for who I am. Maybe you'll even be accepting. Um, Having that mindset of being open, being willing to have conversations, and not immediately be defensive is so important right now in the world that we live in. And so I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak. I'm very honored to be a guest here with Hodey and Mike. And I'm very proud of who I am. And I'm always going to be proud of who I am. And for the people that aren't okay with that, I'm sorry. But I have the right to be who I am. I have the right to exist here in this world. And you can bet that I'm going to fight for that right until my dying breath. And I'll fight for your right to exist too. Just don't try to hurt me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley. Mike, your final thoughts.
So first of all, thank you for putting this together. It's been so long since I did a deep dive just directly on gender and sexual minority issues that I almost forgot how much there is to it. One of the things that the old parties do to kind of keep their voters divided and keep them sort of under control is really sort of hyper polarizing people around like their single issues. So in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, really, if you are a gender and sexual minority person, then those issues are kind of like the they push the non-discrimination button and whoop, you run out and vote for your congressperson, whenever they need you to vote. And when they don't, they're busy pushing the abortion button to control somebody else, or that's how they do. A really beautiful thing about libertarianism is that once we get into this movement and we become familiar with the philosophy, we get to kind of expand our political horizons. At least this is how I experienced it. I no longer had to sort of cling to gender and sexual minority issues as a single lifeline to like the political realm. Like I didn't need the Democrats to be free anymore. And the cool thing about libertarian thinking is that all of the different issues are compatible. The same ideas that set me free as a queer person are the same ideas that set me free as a tax victim or as a person who no longer wants, foreign people to be murdered in my name, or, who, you just go down the list of all the issues, read the Libertarian Party platform. It's a beautiful platform. And so where I'm going with this is because as my awakening has progressed and, lots of other issues have become just as important to me as, social issues, is that I came to this, like my big project. I don't know if right now, because I think bottom unity at this point is pretty well accepted in the party as well. So I'm going to have to dream up something new to outdo that next. But for the time being, I'm still really stuck on it because I love this idea of right and left libertarians learning about how each other thinks about the world and learning to have working relationships with each other that are actually stronger than the political system's tendency to try to divide us. And so I guess that whole setup is because I heard myself using, almost microaggressing against right libertarians earlier. And, granted, that's for the entertainment value, and granted, there are also some really gross narratives that come out of paleo rhetorical approaches, and if those people felt shade thrown on them, then I'm not going to cry because to a certain degree, like, that should be looked at. But with that said, my overall hope is that what you take away from what I said was not that that there's blame or that people are bad people, or in a broader sense, that we aren't all going through like a transformation together. Like, it's not easy unpacking all of the ways that the public schools indoctrinated us into the ways of authority, and the corporate media has indoctrinated us to mistrust each other and to remain divided. Like, all of that conditioning is real on top of the conditioning of homophobia and queerphobia and transphobia. All of that is stuff that we're all unpacking together. So if you ever felt personally attacked by something I said on this podcast, I'm sorry. If you need to do some self-crit, yes. I like to do some self-crit all the time as well. I'm still dealing with internalized misogyny. That's a famous thing that gay men have. So we're all in this together is my point. We're all like working together towards a world set free. And I'm grateful for all of you being in this journey with us. It's okay for that to be awkward and uncomfortable. And it's okay for us to get through it together, and we will.
Awesome. Thank you for keeping that positive. Ashley, you did have something you wanted to add. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say one more thing before we go. If you're out there and you are a GSM, community member, if you're struggling, if you're out there and you have questions, if you need help, please reach out. I'm always happy to have conversations with people who have constructive questions and want to be educated. I'm always happy to have conversations with people who feel they might need some help. So if you're out there and struggling, please know that you are important, that you are loved, and that you matter. And please reach out if you need help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Guys, I want to thank everyone who listened, who tuned in. This was a lot of learning, I think, for me and others, and it's ongoing education. I did want to share my final thoughts as well. I come from the right side. However, I will say I was very inclusive. In fact, one of the reasons I left the right side was I was part of this diversity-loving Tea Party movement, and I found out the RNC wasn't exactly as enthusiastic about embracing diversity as I was. And it was something that they weren't willing to negotiate. In fact, straight up saying, we'll lose the next few elections in order to not have diversity. And it was hard for me to take because I felt like that was the future. For me at the time as a Republican, I felt like that was the future of the Republican Party. We were going to actually be small government. We were going to embrace all of the minorities, and this was just going to, it was going to be fantastic. And it wasn't. And there's two ways that liberty really dies. And one of them is by aggression, and the other is just by saying nothing. The RNC never said we hate them. They just took all the pro-diversity people and said, nah, we're going to support this other guy who's against diversity. Not because he's against diversity. He's just kind of our guy. And that's what we're going to do. We are dealing with human beings. And we're dealing with people that are family members. They're your brothers and sisters. They're your friends, parents and grandparents. And we need to reach out to them the way you would want God to reach out to you on Judgment Day. What would you want someone reaching out to you to look like? It is so easy to be vanilla on this subject. To say, I'm okay with them existing. It's all right. I certainly fight for I'm okay with their right to exist. I'll vote their way in the voting booth. You need to be louder. Because right now, we had 2 transgender people get murdered in the news just last week. If you are a gender and sexual minority, you are 6 times more likely to be unemployed than a straight person right now. If you are, just a normal CIS person, you are 6 times more likely to be employed than someone who's not. That's discrimination on its face. We need to do something about that. And it's more than just a vanilla, I'm okay with them being employed. The revolution we need is you to go out there and say, yes, I love this person. Man, I'm crazy about this person. Man, the work this person does is insane. When people have been losing their jobs over COVID, it's happened a lot. Transgender people were 6 times more likely to lose their business than anybody else. They don't need you to stand on the sidelines and say, I was okay with you being open. They needed your business. They needed your friendship. They needed your love and your understanding. They don't need you can come to me if you're struggling. They need you to come to them. This is not some type of white knighting I'm talking about here and acting and dressing like you're the superhero. They're people and they're very strong. You've just met 2 very strong ones right now. But weren't you at a place in your life at any point when you were feeling depressed, suicidal, stressed out, and you just needed somebody to reach out because you just didn't have the strength to do it? When you have an additional layer of difficulty in this life, man, life is hard enough. Being somebody like me, being somebody who society considers normal. It's easy. It's hard enough. I struggle with suicide and I'm the most vanilla human being on planet. I'm oatmeal. I'm just a normal guy. How hard must it be for somebody else then who feels like Frankenstein's monster from birth to try and get that type of acceptance that they need? So if you're the type of libertarian right now, and I understand because I've been there before, but if you're the type of liberty-loving person right now who just says, I'm okay with them, that's not good enough. And I just encourage you to be a little bit better. I'm learning to be a little bit better still. I mean, from this discussion tonight, I'm trying to be better, and I'm not there yet. You can be better. It's okay to be moving in the right direction. But I hope that this conversation helped you see that you need to make that change in your heart, to say that, you know what, I'm going to stop saying I'm okay with GSM rights. I'm not okay. You know what? I'm not okay with transgender people. I'm not okay with gay people. I love them. These are my people. I'm going to stop saying that's their community and start making it my community, because the only way we're going to do this is if we build that community together. Thank you so much for hearing me out, guys. I really appreciate it. This is a big discussion, big thoughts. Again, we're Libertarians listeners. We couldn't do it without the Patreon. Please join us for the after party. Like I said, we're going to be talking, and if anybody has any questions or anything that they want to add, please feel free. Again, Team Supreme and We Are Libertarians are going to get together for a Zoom after party. Feel free to ask me if you missed the invite. But we are really excited to just have you all join and just be a part of this again. Have an excellent evening, and we will talk to you later.